Hello and welcome to Catholic Answers Live. I'm Cy Kellett, your host. So happy to be back here. Thank you so much for being here with us, for making it possible. And a very happy Monday afternoon or Monday evening or Tuesday morning, depending on where you are around the world. We're very, very grateful that you take this time with us. And we got a really good Monday for you. This is day by day here in the United States, and I do think this will have effects all around the world. We are one day closer to this Supreme Court decision on the Roe versus Wade earlier Supreme Court decision, and we're hoping for good things. But without question, we're going to be needing to be prepared to answer questions, to answer objections, to defend life, in other words, as it moves from the courts into the more political arena. So we got a really good pro-life show for you today. Second hour, Stephanie Gray Connors, the mother of a brand new baby, is going to be here with us. She's back out doing speaking, and you know she's one of the great pro-life voices. As a matter of fact, we have two of the best pro-life speakers in the world on the show today. She's got a new book about in vitro fertilization. So second hour, we're going to talk to her about in vitro fertilization. If this is something that you have been considering, or that you want to talk to other people about, or you want to be able to talk to your RCIA classes about, the perfect hour. So hang out for Stephanie's second hour. We'll talk about in vitro fertilization from the Catholic perspective. This hour, Persuasive Pro-Life, just a general Persuasive Pro-Life. You got pro-life questions, this hour is for you. 888-318-7884. And if you're going to do Persuasive Pro-Life, who do you get? You get the great Trent Horn. Hi, Trent Horn.
Hello, Cy Kellett.
Thanks for being here with us.
Of course.
Yeah. Are you happy that I put you in the same category with Stephanie Gray Connors as two of the great Catholic defenders of life?
Well, I am humbled to be in that spot with Stephanie. We often joke how we will recommend each other if we're unable to do an event.
Oh, yeah.
And I think I interviewed her once, and she meant to say that I was the male version of her, but I think she said I was the female version of her, and I failed to note that and correct it, much to my chagrin.
Oh,
later.
Don't you love that? And then it went out, and now you've got Stephanie Gray Connors saying you're the female version of her. Yeah.
So what are you going to do, right? No, she's great, and
just released it in California.
Well, right.
Don't release it anywhere else.
Yeah, I had her, I should say, on my show recently to talk about her book, Conceived by Science, talking about IVF, because I think a lot of Catholics feel like they can talk about abortion, but they're not sure how to talk about IVF.
Right.
Steph's book is really good on that subject.
Yeah, and she can really talk about it. All right, so 888-318-7884 is the number, 888-318-7884. Trent mentioned his podcast. It's called Council of Trent. It's very, very popular, and you can get it at TrentHornPodcast.com. What have you been doing over at TrentHornPodcast.com lately? What's been dropping? Other than Stephanie Gray Connors.
Lots of good stuff. Well, I just wrapped up today posting. I've kind of done a 3-part series on the Kalam cosmological argument.
Mm-hmm.
So that actually I've really gone through the argument. I rebutted a documentary going against this argument that whatever begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist, so it has a cause. So I covered that in 2 rebuttals. And then I had a dialogue with one of the premier critics of the argument, a philosopher named Alex Malpass. And he and I had a good chat about that, about a 2-hour-long conversation today, because I'm really big in having conversations with people who disagree with me. I'll do it with philosophers, apologists from other faith traditions. I'll be doing a debate on the resurrection tomorrow. That'll air on my podcast next Monday. So I enjoy doing that. That's why I enjoy people, especially if they have different perspectives on abortion, they can feel free to call in here. So
is this the philosopher who disagrees with you, Malpass, you said?
Yes.
Is he an atheist philosopher or a believing philosopher?
I believe he's an atheist.
Oh yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Now there are Christians. Jimmy Akin is one who does not believe the Kalam cosmological argument is sound. I disagree with Jimmy on that. So maybe in the future he and I will have a chat about that. Well,
Jimmy believes it's true.
Sorry. What I meant to let me.
Yeah.
Sorry, I misspoke. Jimmy believes the Kalam cosmological argument is a sound argument if you're using things like scientific evidence for the beginning of the universe. He does not think the arguments from reason or philosophy that try to show that the universe has a finite past are successful. That's where he and I would part ways.
Yeah. But now Thomas Aquinas didn't make that argument, because he thought it was conceivable that God could have made a creation with an infinite past.
That's correct. And now I would hold the view more that St. Bonaventure had, which is that not even God could create a beginningless past, because that would entail contradictions, and God doesn't make contradictions. That'd be a fun subject for another show. If we get enough people who want to call in about Kalam, I don't know.
Have you and
never
Jimmy
know.
do it together? That would be very good. That'd be very
Yeah.
interesting.
Or awkward.
Or awkward, yeah.
You never know. Or we could just talk, and then both
Yeah.
of us could take audience Q&A. Would be fun. So, but today I want to talk with people. Agree, disagree, wherever you're at on abortion. I'm happy to answer your questions or chat with you about it. So,
Up first is Tom in New Jersey, and if I'm remembering right, we've speak with Tom in New Jersey rather regularly. Do I have the right person, Trent? Do you happen to remember?
yes, I think Tom gets a free sandwich now for.
Oh, he's
I think
got
this
for
is his
5 calls.
10th call.
Oh,
You
10th
get
call.
he-
Oh, I thought it was
get
after
the
5.
Get the punch card out, and I'm
All
excited.
right. Congratulations on your free sandwich, Tom. You got a question for Trent?
Oh, yeah. Thank you, guys. I appreciate that introduction. And so, yeah, Trent, you, along with Stephanie Gray and others, will argue that, well, the reason why a woman should be legally obligated to sustain the life of her fetus in the womb, but a parent should not be legally obligated to give bone marrow to their children or to anyone else, is because a woman's uterus is for sustaining the life of the child, but your bone marrow is not for sustaining the life of someone else. And I
that'd be
think
part
that
of it.
makes sense. But a critic might ask in response, okay, why does the fact that a woman's uterus is for sustaining the fetus mean that she should be legally obliged to use it this way? Because you could say one of the purposes of a woman's vagina is to have a man's member placed inside of it, but it does not
Right.
follow that she should be legally obliged to allow a man to do that simply
Right.
because her body part is for the man in that respect. So how would you respond to that?
Yeah, I think I would say that there's key differences between these cases. Just because something would be natural doesn't necessarily mean that it is obligatory. My stomach is for eating, but it doesn't mean I have to eat any kind of food that is offered to me. So I think we have the difference between the two cases would arise looking at it in that way. I think also we should try to back up a little bit to see what is the argument saying about the unborn child and his particular rights. Because one could argue that, and I'm going to try to keep this as PG as possible. Well, you could say that female reproductive organ, I guess, let me try, I'll spitball here and see what I can do. For a man who is capable of marriage, we could say that other women's bodies are made for the act of marriage, but there is no particular female body that was made just for him. I don't believe in soulmates or things like that, and the church doesn't believe in anything like that. So I think right there, you couldn't say that a man has a right to a particular woman's body just in virtue of him being a man and them being a woman, because his body might be made for complementarity with any woman, but not necessarily any particular woman. However, that would change upon marriage. Upon contracting marriage, we talk about this in moral theology manuals. It gets a bad rap sometimes. So this idea, well, Paul mentions it, like the marital debt, that husbands and wives, their bodies are made for each other in the sense they become for each other through the act of marriage. And so there, one can argue that there is a obligation that exists between men and women to offer their bodies to one another in marriage. That doesn't mean you can just demand that, or there's a whole lot of other things that kind of go into that. But the analogy you give, it's interesting there. I think I would say, yeah, one man's body, other women in general are ordered towards the marital act with him, but not any particular woman. That changes upon consent to matrimony, to marriage. There you have a man and a woman who are really literally made for each other. And there is an obligation that actually does arise between the two of them. So I think then when we go back to pregnancy, it's not that it seems clear to me the uterus is not just for any unborn child necessarily. I think a very strong case can be made that a woman's uterus exists for the children she conceives. And so now this can get into, of course, very, very strange cases. What if she's implanted with an embryo that isn't hers? I would still say she has an obligation there, but that will take us too far afield what we're talking about today. But I do think a very strong case is going to be made that the uterus exists for the children that she conceived. Because when that child comes into existence, it's not like he just could look around metaphorically and say, oh, I could have any of these moms out here. No. He is made for a particular woman's uterus. A particular woman's uterus was designed for him. And so I don't think the analogy between a man and his capabilities of the marital act are making him complemented to any particular woman. I don't think the analogies would hold in both the cases. That there the child is conceived, comes into existence, he is ordered towards a particular organ, that woman's uterus to sustain him, and vice versa. So I hope that is helpful for you. And yeah, definitely call back in, Tom. It's always helpful. And I tried very hard to keep it all very PG to discuss. I think I understand the objection that is raised, but I had fun talking around that a little bit. So thanks for calling.
And we have to take our break, Tom. So thank you very much. Before I go to the break, however, we have some books I'd like to encourage you to consider picking up for your Lenten reading. And a brand new book that just came out is just perfect for your Lenten reading. It's called These 12, The Gospel Through the Apostles' Eyes. Just follow the lives of the apostles, be inspired by the lives of the apostles, and see Jesus through the eyes of the apostles who loved him. You can get that over at shop.catholic.com. They got a great price on it. We're already getting great feedback on it. JPL says, I just finished reading These 12 last night, and I'm tempted to start reading it again. These 12 is interesting, informative, inspirational. These 12 is a book all should read. It's from the really incomparable Rod Bennett. It's called These 12, The Gospel Through the Apostles' Eyes. Maybe consider that for your Lenten reading. Head on over and get it at shop.catholic.com.
Catholic Answers Live with Trent Horn is coming right back.
Are you a coffee drinker? If so, you can now enjoy a coffee roasted to perfection by the Carmelite monks of Wyoming. Delicious Mystic Monk coffee is roasted and prepared by monks in a hidden cloistered monastery and is available in over 25 varieties. All Mystic Monk coffees are works of perfection and labors of love. For more information on how to purchase Mystic Monk coffee, visit mysticmonkcoffee.com. That's mysticmonkcoffee.com.
One of the reasons we should go to Mass is because it is the food of the saints that we receive. And for the saints, they understood rightly that the time after Holy Communion, that those moments are the most precious moments of our lives.
The Holy Sacrifice of the Mass, live from the EWTN Chapel, every morning, 8 Eastern, on EWTN Radio and Television.
Welcome back, Catholic Answers Live. Persuasive pro-life this hour. Would you like a little help being more persuasive in your pro-life arguments? Are there pro-life arguments that you are not persuaded of? You'd like a little help in thinking them through, or you'd like the challenge of thinking them through with Trent? 888-318-7884, 888-318-7884. Totally unrelated to you, Trent. I was reading, somebody asked a question on Reddit. It was about this an unbeliever making some claims about the Gospels, and somebody goes, like, who's a good apologist to respond to these things? And then all these people started piling on, going, Trent Horn, you should hear this guy, Trent Horn. And I was like, man, Trent's on the internet under 10 different
Reddit.
names,
That's
promoting himself again. You know, like,
it gets exhausting, all those sock puppet accounts.
Yeah.
But
I know a guy named Trent Horn, and then the person who wrote it's named Bent Born or something like that. That's your fake identity.
Trent Horn.
888-318-7884, the number. Persuasive Pro-Life. If you've got a pro-life question, you're welcome to call Trent Horn. Damien in Austin, Texas, watching on YouTube. You are up next, Damien. Please go ahead with your question for Trent.
Hi, Trent. Hi, Cy again.
Hi, Damien.
My point with good shot again with the trash can there.
Can you tell when I made it? Like
Yeah, good.
Oh, yeah,
You're very excited.
I just crumple up the old ad and I see if I can make the shot, and I made it. I made a hook shot. Thank you very much.
Yes, you did. So my point with the abortion discussion here is that it seems like no one discusses the point that the entire abortion issue is 100% the man's fault. The woman can consent to having sexual intercourse with a guy, but he doesn't have to impregnate her in the process. I give the examples like you go rock climbing and you choose to go rock climbing with someone who doesn't want to bring rock climbing safety gear. Okay, fine. But when the woman's halfway up the rock cliff, then the guy decides to shove her off, causing the natural process of her falling and breaking her arm.
Okay.
He kicks off the natural process of pregnancy.
Yeah.
Not her.
Okay. I was worried you were going to get more graphic, but I dig what you're saying. So do you see the metaphor he's using there, Trent?
Kind of. You're trying to say that men are the only ones who are responsible for the existence of an unborn child, that women are not responsible. I think most women would say, well, if I have sexual relations with a man and I allow him to complete that act while we are in, and once again, I'm going to try to keep it all PG here for our listeners, and I allow him to complete that act while we are coupled, if you will, I think most women would say, I knew that this could result in a baby, so I'm responsible for, especially, in the vast majority of cases, the woman consents to beginning the act and allowing it to reach its culmination. So how would she not be responsible?
You changed my scenario. My scenario was the one where she's consenting to this sexual act with the man, but she's not consenting to him impregnating her as a result. So there's other ways of not shoving her off the cliff to go rock climbing. He's the one actually kicking off the natural process that she can't control. She can't control gravity and falling and breaking her arm after he shoves her off the cliff.
But here's where I think you've misunderstood here a little bit. You can't consent to a consequence. You consent to an action. And in consenting to an action, you have accepted the consequences of the act. So, like, I'm trying to understand, like, with your analogy, like him throwing her off of the cliff, are you saying like she can't control which sperm fertilizes the egg? I really am having a hard time following this.
Well, I don't want to lead. I just want to be careful about but are you talking about an act of deception? I just want to be careful about how graphic we get. But are you talking about an act of deception?
There are multiple engaging in sexual intercourse with someone. There's multiple different ways you can do that, and there's also multiple different ways you can discuss with your partner about what you consent and not consent to. If the man agrees to all of that and then does this, impregnates her when she had a discussion with him going, I'm fine with doing everything you want to do, I just don't want to be don't impregnate me. And he decides to not go with her wishes and then impregnates her. That is the scenario I'm talking about.
When you say don't impregnate, because it sounds like you could be saying that, use contraception, do coitus interruptus, whatever it may be. The problem I have here is that the woman is consenting to an act that is known for creating children, and the man is doing that too. So I agree with you that it's wrong to say that women are the only ones responsible for the creation of children. Many times we don't talk about the man, and we should do that. But I think it's very clear that when both a man and a woman consent to the act, even if they do things like use birth control or try coitus interruptus, those have known failure rates that are involved with those acts. That's no different than consenting to driving drunk. And even if you play the radio loud and roll down the window and do everything you can to not crash, you still have, engaged in the activity. So I would say that I don't find this analogy very persuasive. It'd be like if a woman told a man, hey, I'm going to pay you to bury toxic waste in my backyard, but don't get my children sick. Well, no, no matter what safeguards you take, you've taken a risk in doing something that could hurt the children. Once again, you consent to actions, not necessarily consequences. So I would say both the man and the woman have an obligation to the unborn child. The man has an obligation in virtue of being, he has an obligation to support the woman and child financially, and the mother has an obligation to sustain the child through the organ that is designed to keep the child alive, just like she would have a natural obligation to breastfeed her child, if that is the only way to keep that child alive. So I'm not really convinced by that argument. I think that they're both equally responsible. If you choose to engage in the marital act, you have engaged in an act that is ordered towards the ends of creating children. You have obligations towards those children. I think that's a very sound moral intuition, and it applies equally to men and women. But thanks for the thought experiment, Damien. It was certainly interesting.
Both calls coming, just requiring a delicacy of speech today. So I would just remind our callers, but I'm not, the callers have been fine, but let's just be careful because little ears are listening. So just say it in the way you'd say it if you were their mom and dad. Damien, thanks very, very much again for the call. Jake in Buffalo, New York is up next. Persuasive Pro-Life this hour with Trent Horn. Jake's listening on 101.7 FM. Jake, thank you for the call. Go ahead with your question for Trent.
Hello. Okay, so I'm glad you just reminded everyone of child's ears. So Jeremiah, I believe it's 1 verse 5, talks about, I had a plan for you, I called you by name. I think I have that verse right.
It's right after Jeremiah was a bullfrog. That's right. I'm just kidding.
Come on now.
Yeah.
Jeremiah was a bullfrog, as many people think it's in the Bible, but that is not in the Bible. That is Three Dog Night.
So Jeremiah 1:5 says this before we continue. Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you, and before you were born, I consecrated you. I appointed you a prophet to the nations.
Okay. So my question is, you had I normally try to, I usually feel like I have all my bases covered. I told the screener that, but then you said a few minutes ago, there's no such thing as soulmates. Now, yes, I might be a romantic, but that's not what this call is about. It's not about me believing in soulmates. I guess it's more about if God has a plan for you, and you are, it sounds like, with that Jeremiah verse, that you are intended to live. So pardon my dog, he hates the car. We're sitting in my driveway. So
that's fine.
My question is, when you're talking about situations, this is a problem you hear all the time.
I feel so bad for the dog. I'm sorry.
The dog is fine. He's sitting in the back seat yawning because he just hates the car.
Right.
So I will get him out of the car and continue talking. But
sorry.
So the question is, in instances of the R word, I'll say, which is a large argument for the pro-abortion side, and I understand it's a very sensitive issue. But when that happens, or say a young child becomes pregnant, where does the plan for you
God's plan come in? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, what I would say here is we have to understand that what God is saying in Jeremiah 1:5, this is a specific thing towards Jeremiah as a prophet, saying that God, predestined. He knew that Jeremiah would be a prophet. This is not some random thing Jeremiah did, but Jeremiah also freely took part in it. So be careful about how we apply that particular verse to everybody. It's talking about God's plan for us. And so I would recommend paragraph 600 of the Catechism, which says, "To God all moments of time are present in their immediacy. When, therefore, he establishes his eternal plan of predestination, he includes in it each person's free response to his grace." So what that means is that God knows what is going to happen. He has a plan for creation. He has a plan for us, but it doesn't mean that the plan is carried out by God directing all of us like we're little puppets. God takes into account in the plan he makes how each of us will freely respond to his grace. So in taking that into account, like if someone comes into existence through rape, for example, it doesn't mean that God positively willed that an act of evil would occur like rape. It reminds me in Genesis chapter 50 when Joseph, after being sold into slavery by his brothers, goes to Egypt, becomes a leader there, saves his family from starvation. Genesis 50, he says, what you meant for evil, God meant for good, for the salvation of many people. God can take any evil we freely choose and bring even greater goods from it.
Thanks very much, Jake. Take the dog for a walk. It's a wild Catholic Answers today. Graphic descriptions of things we don't usually graphically describe. Howling dogs. Right back with more. Trent Horn.
Have you enrolled in the Catholic Answers School of Apologetics? Let me ask you a more important question. Do you believe as a Catholic that you have an obligation to share the Catholic faith? In fact, the Church has answered this question, and the answer is that all confirmed Catholics are obliged to share the faith. It's actually in canon law. Catholic Answers is here to help you fulfill that obligation. Our School of Apologetics courses will equip you to help all the people you come in contact with understand what the Church teaches and why. A great place to start is with all the Catholics in your life. Learn the art of apologetics from the best of the best and start sharing the gospel today. Visit schoolofapologetics.com. That's schoolofapologetics.com. Here's a question. Is it really possible to be friends with someone who died 2,000 years ago? Maybe the problem is that we've grown way too comfortable with the story of Jesus. Nice man, right? Taught us to love one another, said not to judge people. We celebrate his birthday every year. It's time to put away this small, safe version of Jesus, says Cy Kellett. Nobody that bland could have transformed the world. In A Teacher of Strange Things, Cy presents Jesus Christ undiluted by sentiment, with all his radical words and deeds uncensored. Do you know someone, your son or daughter perhaps, or maybe your mom or dad, who needs the friendship of Jesus Christ? Do you? Order your copy of A Teacher of Strange Things by visiting shop.catholic.com today or asking for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
Did you know you can access Catholic Answers Live right from your phone or other mobile device? Download the Catholic Answers Live app today. The Catholic Answers Live app, available now on iOS and Android.
Matt Swaim here. Tomorrow on the Sunrise Morning Show, we'll discuss Fat Tuesday traditions and look at dust and ashes in the Bible with Steve Ray as we prepare to enter into Lent. Now back to Catholic Answers Live.
Welcome back. Catholic Answers Live. A really fantastic pro-life Monday here, second hour. Stephanie Gray Connors, who many people do refer to as Stephanie Gray, as one of our earlier callers did, because she was doing this long before she was married. But now Stephanie Gray Connors, and we're going to talk about in vitro fertilization, something that baffles and confuses many people, and particularly why is there any moral opposition to in vitro fertilization? Why would anyone have a moral objection to something that brings beautiful, beautiful babies into the world? And we will talk about that with Stephanie Gray Connors the second hour. This hour, Trent Horn, 888-318-7884, 888-318-7884. And for one reason or another, technical or otherwise, we have cleared all the phone lines. So it's perfect time to call if you've been wanting to call and ask Trent something, because for whatever reason, was it me? I don't know. Somebody hung up on everybody. 888-318-7884. We'll never know who it was. There's no possible way to ever know who it was, but all the lines are open. 888-318-7884. I want to ask you about something that I thought I might ask you about at the beginning of the show, but now that I have a minute, if I may, ask you about it.
Sure.
There's a Senate bill that has been coming up today. Have you been following this? It's Senate Bill 1975, and it has to do with trying to override all. Essentially what happened in the Roe versus Wade decision is every single state law got thrown out and everything got federalized as far as abortion goes. And so
Go ahead. I mean, you got to be careful with that. The judiciary prevented the legislatures of the states from restricting abortion in any meaningful way.
Yes. But now so they're saying, well, the court's going to overturn that. So now we'll just do it in the Congress.
Right.
Have you heard about that?
Oh, yeah. This is something they've tried to do for a while. And they may get more motivation if Roe versus Wade is significantly undermined this summer. We don't know exactly what will happen. But yeah, I'm praying that it won't. I think it would require. I don't know if there are enough votes in the Senate or even the House, frankly, to be able to accomplish that. I do think, though, it's going to be it's interesting. It will be a real big test of some people who have said, oh, it doesn't matter if a Catholic politician is pro-choice because they can't do anything anyways. I've heard that yarn for a long time. From some certain people online saying it doesn't matter really if you vote for a pro-life, if a Catholic politician is pro-life or pro-choice because they can't do anything anyways, was
Right.
the argument, that it's the Supreme Court and they're not going to be able to change anything and it doesn't matter. Well, it'll be interesting to me if it does come to that, and then I would say, well, what, now suddenly we have an opportunity where Catholic politicians in the Congress and our Catholic president do have the opportunity to say whether we will protect unborn lives or not, specifically just on that issue. And so we'll see. So I think it'll lay to rest what they were saying, that no, this really was important. It was certainly an important thing to discuss. And then if it does come to that, and yeah, I'm just going to say it, I would say a Catholic politician who votes for a federal codifying of Roe v. Wade, if a bishop does not withhold communion from them, they're a joke. They would be an absolute joke and a disgrace to the church. If after, because you can make all kinds of excuses you want. You can make all kinds of excuses. Oh, they're not materially cooperated. Oh, this, oh, that. If they vote specifically just to codify Roe v. Wade into federal law,
Right.
and then you say there's nothing wrong with them receiving our Lord and Savior, you're a disgrace to the Catholic Church. You should step down. Any bishop or prelate who says that, I'll go on record.
I hadn't thought about that.
Any one of them. Any one of them.
It's striking that if the Supreme Court strikes down Roe versus Wade, it's a real time of deciding for Catholic politicians, because you
Now you're on the
cannot
hook.
vote for this. You cannot directly vote for this. That would be the same in a moral sense of providing any other direct support to abortion. I mean, in the moral sense, you might as well be driving the person there. You might as well be paying.
How would
for
that be
it.
different? How would that be different from voting for a law like that says the states cannot ban lynching, the states cannot ban marital rape?
Yeah.
It would be no different. And so that's for me. That will be a real test if it comes down to that, where people in the Congress and the president, their vote will decide.
Yeah.
And if they're going to vote directly for this, and if you think they should still be held in good standing as Catholics and receive the Eucharist and be treated like anybody else, it'll show really if you put party before principle and before faith.
Yeah,
frankly.
And what I think is going to happen too, Trent, is, and I know many people don't believe this is even possible, but it is. Political changes happen all the time. I think that there are many in the Democratic Party who are going to return to their pro-life roots. There's always been a pro-life, pro-worker party, and they forgot both of those things. And I think you're going to see an actual shift where, and I hope so. I mean, I hope that's the case.
I pray that pro-choice individuals in both of the major parties will reconsider their views, because there's there are pro-life Democrats, there are pro-choice Republicans. I want anybody who supports legal abortion to reconsider their view.
Yeah.
But I think if the court does allow states to have greater flexibility and this ends up before the Congress, I think especially Catholic politicians should be held accountable on how they would vote for something like that. It would be unconscionable.
Maybe we'll be surprised by some. So I'm sure by some politicians disappointed by them, and well, we're pretty used to being disappointed as pro-life people, but maybe also pleasantly surprised by some.
Yeah, right.
Lynn, I have a magic power today. I just said Lynn's name and she hung up the phone. So I apologize, Lynn. The number is 888-318-7884, 888-31-TRUTH. Persuasive Pro-Life on this Monday with Trent Horn, our guest, 888-318-7884. Anything? You got any other pro-life news that's out there, Trent? Like things that you're tracking? Because in a certain way, you seemed kind of almost like not really that interested in that one because it doesn't seem realistic that they're going to pass it.
Oh, you mean the
Senate one?
Yeah, I don't know. I think it's going to require a lot, and I think that there are still enough votes in the Senate and possibly the House as well for it to not go forward. But once again, that does show, you're voting for people who don't think some people are people has consequences.
All right, Michael in Texas. Oh, I said his name. He didn't hang up, so I think we might be going to get a call on the line. Michael in Texas, watching on YouTube. You are next. Go ahead with your... Oh, there he is. Okay, good. Go ahead.
Yep, I'm here. I would just like to say that men need to have more attention towards them after they realize that, after an abortion, because, I went to Rachel's Vineyard and I feel much better about myself, but I still would love to be able to hug my child, which I miss dearly.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Anyway, it's I think in the passing in the comments, men are mentioned almost like in passing, and so
I think that's so important what you just said, Trent.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I firmly agree with you. There is actually an article on the website for the USCCB. The article is called "The Hollow Men: Male Grief and Trauma Following Abortion." So I definitely recommend that for our readers. I remember a while ago, as our caller alluded to, Rachel's Vineyard and other post-abortive services for women oftentimes have resources for men as well. I remember there being a group that I was familiar with many years ago called Fathers Forever. There might still be some chapters out there here or there that also is related to this. So men, knowing that they've engaged in an act that brought a child into existence and were helpless and in many cases sometimes they cooperated with the abortion, other times they were completely helpless and unable to save their child. That can be very weighty upon a man's soul, and they need to seek out healing just as women seek out healing who've been involved in abortions. So, definitely recommend it. Definitely check out that resource for our listeners, The Hollow Men at USCCB on their pro-life activities section of their website. But thank you so much for calling in and sharing that with us. And I'll ask our listeners to definitely pray for Michael, what he's going through.
Indeed. And it just seems part of the whole media regime of ignoring the true stories of abortion and how many men are just devastated because of what has happened to their children. Grandparents as well, brothers and sisters. I mean, the devastation is profound and all over, and the only way we can keep going like this is if we ignore it. And so God bless you, Michael, for helping us to not ignore it. We do have to take a break, as Trent said. We'll be right back with more Persuasive Pro-Life, Catholic Answers Live, 888-318-7884.
Let us help you with your question today on Catholic Answers Live.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Real Estate for Life. Real Estate for Life connects homebuyers and sellers to real estate agents while supporting pro-life organizations. On the web at realestateforlife.org.
He was a scholar, a preacher, a Capuchin Franciscan, and a defender of Christendom.
Matthew Bunsen and the Doctors of the Church.
St. Lawrence of Brindisi was one of the most respected preachers in the 17th century, but he also helped raise an army against the Ottoman Turks when they invaded Hungary in 1601. He led the troops to victory against the Turks, carrying only a crucifix. He was declared a Doctor of the Church in 1959.
For more about the Doctors of the Church, visit doctorsofthechurch.com.
We have a big problem. Our culture is dying, and souls are in danger of being lost. The answer is conversion to Jesus Christ in His church. St. Paul Street Evangelization is a Catholic organization, and we have hundreds of teams spreading the good news throughout the country. But we need your help. The harvest is great, but the laborers are few. Find out more and get involved today at streetevangelization.com. That's streetevangelization.com.
Welcome back. Catholic Answers Live. 2 hours of great pro-life conversation today. Trent Horn is our guest. Are you handicapping at all whether or not they're going to overturn Roe versus Wade, Trent, or are you just patiently waiting and see what happens?
I am just waiting. Well, it's interesting. What I'm working on now is I am revising my book, Persuasive Pro-Life.
Oh, you are?
I've been given the green light to do a second edition of the book. So very excited. It's going to be revised, updated, expanded. Though my goal is actually I've condensed sections and added more and updated a lot of outdated information because the book's almost 10 years old to make it a little bit shorter but have more content in it. So I'm super excited about that. So I'm going to be working on all of that. I think, honestly, what I'll probably do is complete the book here probably in the next month or so, complete the edits, send them into revision. I'm going to leave half a page blank, and then I'd love to have the book ready to go, and I'll fill in that half of the page in June when Dobbs comes out, and then get it off. That would be great if we could we could do that.
Yeah.
So I'm working on that now. I'm a little bit behind the 8 ball because I've had debates and dialogues. I got a lot of stuff going on, Si, surprisingly enough.
Yeah, I know. You're the hardest working man in Catholic radio, but somehow you do it, Trent. So
sure, I'm trying to keep it going, but I'm really excited about that. And I've got other books I'm working on as well. But this is one I think has helped a lot of people. And I think, honestly, the revision, I think it's going to make it more readable, more accessible. It's nice because now that this is my second book, and
you've progressed as a writer since then.
Well, yeah, I wrote 7 books after this, so now I think I've learned a lot, and I think I could really spruce it up, and especially if I could shorten it a bit, so we could do like a $3 bulk deal to get it to as many people as
wonderful!
Possible.
Yeah, use all those lessons you learned from writing Things the Saints Never Said, and put that and make. You've gained more experience, in other words. So put it to use.
That's right. Things the Saints Never Said. Abortion isn't a big deal. Like, I could fill the whole book. I could do a gigantic book of Things the Saints Never Said.
Stan in Georgia's next, listening on the 911 for your soul, 91.1 FM. Stan, go ahead with your question for Trent.
Oh, hi. Appreciate you taking my call. Before I get to my question, I just want to tell Trent I appreciate his book, Made This Way. I'm a catechist, and I teach the confirmation class section on sexuality and morality, and that book has been really helpful. I appreciate it.
Sure.
Here's my question. I've had a career in emergency medicine, and I'm kind of pre-tired now, mostly doing urgent care. But I've always gone by the rule that was, I don't hear it talked about much, put out by the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops several years ago, maybe 10, 15 years ago, about if a rape victim comes to you and it's within 48 hours of conception of coitus, and they are not pregnant, it is permissible, in light of mercy for the victim, to offer emergency contraception.
Do you have to?
I just wondered.
Let me just clarify something, Stan, and then I'll let Trent answer. Do you have to inquire about ovulation?
Well, if it's within 48 hours, a lot of times they can't prove that it actually happened.
Trent?
But so there was some program, I think, on Murphy Brown that shows how long ago this was, and they had a witness, a Catholic doctor, saying, "Oh no, we can't do that," and it really made the church look like a ghoul. Like, oh, there's no mercy for the victim. And this sister was giving this talk. It was at Benedictine College in Illinois. I just happened to be there, and she brought to light this teaching of the bishops and trying to get CBS to retract the way they made the church look under that kind
Yeah.
of circumstance.
They never
Sure.
retract
Is
sitcoms.
that still the rule? I mean, I
well,
always
yeah,
gone
so-
by that. I never hear it talked about.
Well, yeah. So the current, I'm very, very certain. I'm certain that the current edition of what is called the Ethical and Religious Directives for Catholic Healthcare Providers. This is the paragraph. I think it's paragraph 36. It says this: compassionate and understanding care should be given to a person who is the victim of sexual assault. Healthcare providers should cooperate with law enforcement officials and offer the person psychological and spiritual support, as well as accurate medical information. A female who has been raped should be able to defend herself against a potential conception from the sexual assault. If after appropriate testing, there is no evidence conception has occurred already, she may be treated with medications that would prevent ovulation, sperm capacitation, or fertilization. It is not permissible, however, to initiate or recommend treatments to have as their purpose or direct effect removal, destruction, or interference with implantation of a fertilized ovum, or I would say embryo. So I think actually I think I have here a white paper that was related to this. Oh, this is from a Westchester Institute paper called Emergency Contraceptives in Catholic Healthcare. It says, the absence of consent in a sexual assault morally renders the prevention of fertilization an act of self-defense rather than a contraceptive act. So we wouldn't call it contraception. Essentially, the woman is defending herself against the sperm that are invading her body. Now, it says if after appropriate testing is done, I'm not sure what that particularly refers to. You wouldn't have to have absolute certainty that implantation has not occurred or fertilization hasn't occurred yet, but you just have to have moral certainty. So if it's something that happened shortly within, especially within 24 hours, even 48 hours, you could still have a lot of certainty that fertilization hasn't happened yet. But also you could do a questionnaire or survey asking about last menstrual periods, ovulation, things like that, to get a general, at least moral certainty that you're within a window or be appropriate to administer these medications whose purpose is to prevent the rapist's attack from continuing. For our listeners who want more on that, I would definitely recommend the National Catholic Bioethics Center. Their website is ncbcenter.org, and they can go into more detail about what healthcare providers should and shouldn't do in these circumstances.
Okay, Stan?
But thanks for calling.
Yes, thank you, gentlemen.
Yeah, thank you very, very much. I find that conversation helpful in debunking, it's fascinating to me that it was a sitcom, Murphy Brown, that did that, because there's this kind of constant cynical humor that we have now. It really does divorce people from the truth. But what I was getting at, Trent, was that this kind of debunks a common. You would almost call it a meme, I guess, that this is all about control of women. The point is that it's not all about control of women. In a situation like this, the point is to empower and help the woman. But the only complicating factor is there a baby present? That's the only complicating factor. If there's no baby present, then all kinds of means can be used to protect the mother from the sperm of an attacker.
Right. Absolutely. We believe in the intrinsic dignity of every human person, mother, child, even the rapists. We pray for their repentance. We believe that justice should be served so that they're held accountable for their crimes. We want to respect the dignity of every single person, and we treat people accordingly. And that means for an unborn child, we don't kill them because of the circumstances of their conception. And this is a good segue into next hour. That also, how you came into existence, a child is a good. It doesn't mean that the way they came into existence is always going to be good, because you're going to talk with Stephanie about IVF later, and that'll parallel what we're discussing here.
Indeed, that is exactly right. So I mean, I don't know. I just think these easy memes are really. It makes people feel smart.
Well, they misunderstand what the church teaches if it's trying to say, oh, well, or they don't understand fine points on these issues and other things like that.
If I may, Trent, because again with the phones, we're still awaiting more calls. And you can call. We can get you on with Trent if you call right now, 888-318-7884. Reading an article in the New Yorker last week in which the author is very concerned about the Roe versus Wade possibility being overturned because he says then some states will pass what are called personhood laws, which means you would classify the person, the unborn child, as a legal person, which there's great debate even among very pro-life people about whether that's actually true under the Constitution. But here's the problem that he posed, this writer, was in some places in Central America, in some countries in Central America, and in some states in the United States, women who have had miscarriages have been prosecuted and they've been innocent. I don't believe you could be overzealous in the defense of life, but I do think you can be overzealous in thinking that you can control everything, and that actually could be quite horrible to take a natural process like miscarriage and criminalize it.
Well, let me make an analogy,
Okay.
Sai. What would you think of this argument? We shouldn't say that infants, if you say infants are persons, some infants have died naturally from SIDS, sudden infant death syndrome. They have died from trauma to the brain through some kind of congenital defect that looks identical to shaken baby syndrome.
Oh,
and because of this, because of this, some mothers and fathers have been falsely arrested and falsely imprisoned for the deaths of their infants, even though they're completely innocent, they didn't do anything wrong. So clearly, to prevent that, we should say infants are not persons and it's not immoral to kill them. Now, what do you think of that argument?
Yeah, I think that's a good argument, but but all of that depends on prudence, and so we have to teach that prudence. Like as pro-life people, we have to teach that prudence. Like, don't even risk turning natural miscarriage into something that could be so much worse because you're investigating things that really should not be investigated.
And that's going to come down to prosecutors and their discretion when it comes to bringing charges against individuals, because there are cases where it's very clear, a mother who has chosen to use illegal drugs and places her baby at great risk and has harmed her child, or fathers who have placed mothers in this situation to cause this to happen. We would think they need to be held accountable. But you're right, miscarriage is something that's very common. You can't always find a cause or something like that. So recognizing the personhood of the unborn, it doesn't mean that recognizing their personhood does not mean that you have an unjust legal system that will follow. Because you can have an unjust legal system based on any recognition of someone's personhood. It'll be up to us to use prudence and foresight in making determinations about when parents are held responsible for how they treat their children, born or unborn. So I wouldn't let that be too concerning. I would also say that I think that most states that would make abortion illegal would follow previous laws prior to Roe or laws that have been successful, like heartbeat bills, like bills that outlaw abortion after a detectable heartbeat is found. And there you have nothing that relates to contraception, nothing that relates to anything like that. I think that most states, because those are the kind of laws that we have been seeing that have gotten the most support in state legislatures. So from a practical perspective, I don't see it coming up that much, really.
But even in a perfectly just system, there are people who will get away with, so to speak, abortion. You're not going to be
people
perfect.
Get away with every crime.
Yeah. Okay.
Our system is designed. Our system is designed for people to get away with crimes rather than for them to be falsely accused of crimes. And that's something we inherited from Roman law, but also comes actually from early Catholic versions of canon law and things like that. So that is, but once again, we start with the basics. All human beings have a basic right to life. And then we apply that in sensible ways in every case.
Trent, you are super good at what you do. Really appreciate it. Trent Horn is the author of Why We're Catholic, Persuasive Pro-Life, Answering Atheism, and a whole bunch of other books. You can find them all at shop.catholic.com. Thanks, Trent. Hope we get to see you soon.
I hope so, Si. Thanks.
Coming up next, as we've said, Stephanie Gray Connors. We're going to talk specifically with Stephanie, one of the great pro-life voices in the world today, about in vitro fertilization. Many people are baffled by the church's teaching on in vitro fertilization. If you are, next hour, perfect for you. Right after this on Catholic Answers Live. Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. We can pretty much call this pro-life superstar day. Trent Horn last hour, this hour, Stephanie Gray Connors, who has a brand new book out called Conceived by Science, Thinking Carefully and Compassionately About Infertility and IVF. You probably know some of her earlier works, and you're probably like, what happened to Stephanie? Well, she got a sweet little baby who everybody here just got to look at just before the show, except for me, because my monitor wasn't on. But congratulations on the new baby and on the new book.
Oh, but rich.
Yeah. So, and what's the little lady's name?
Violet.
Little Violet. Oh, come on. All right.
She's my little flower. I call her my little flower.
Oh, that's so nice. That's
and actually, I'll do a shout out here. Her middle name is Grace, Violet Grace. And we named her middle name after my dear friend Lila Grace Rose. Lila's known for her pro-life work. Because Lila, we credit for setting up my husband and I, as well as we almost miscarried Violet. And Lila connected us to a NAPRO technology doc, Dr. George Delgado, who you probably know.
Of course,
right, in San Diego. Yeah. And she connected me the day we got blood work back showing my progesterone levels were dropping. And I got on progesterone right away, and Violet was saved, and I gave birth several months later.
Oh, that's beautiful. Well, I'll get to see Violet one of these days. Everybody else did, but I had to have my monitor off. Our number is 888-318-7884, and we really do like babies around here at Catholic Answers. We were just talking with you before we went on the air. What if Violet needs you? That it's fine. She can come on the air because I mean, it's Catholic Answers. If we don't like babies, we're no good at being Catholic. But so I think that many people then reason, well, the Catholic Church must accept IVF because look at all these beautiful babies that in vitro fertilization has produced.
Right. Great question out of the gate. And I think that's where we need to pause and say, yes, babies are a gift. They are to be celebrated. And the question we want to ask ourselves is, because that is the case, does that give us permission or license to do just anything to achieve or receive this gift of a baby, this gift of life? And everyone who thinks of that question could come up with the answer, actually, no, we can't just do anything. For example, we couldn't kidnap someone's baby in order to achieve the gift of a child because we would have stolen someone else's child. So as much as children are to be celebrated and to be received and enjoyed, we can't commit an unethical act such as kidnapping to achieve the beautiful end of a child. So what we need to consider with examining in vitro fertilization is that an ethical or an unethical act or means to achieve a child? And so that's what we can unpack in this hour with our conversation, with people calling in. But in brief, the answer would be that in vitro fertilization manufactures human beings into existence, treating a subject as though it is an object. And in doing so, it diminishes the human person, as well as creates a whole number of ethical quandaries, such as eugenic selection, killing some children to create other children. And so there's a whole host of problems that we can unpack. But the main principle is the end doesn't justify the means. So yes, the end of children is great, but certain means to achieve that end are not ethical.
If you'd like to talk with Stephanie Gray Connors about her brand new book, Conceived by Science, Thinking Carefully and Compassionately About Infertility and IVF, or if you just have general questions about IVF, you are welcome to call 888-318-7884, 888-318-7884. So as you have engaged in your long pro-life work, is this something that I can imagine you probably go give a pro-life talk somewhere, and there are people who don't even know that IVF is problematic, maybe even think of it as a pro-life undertaking. Is this why you wrote the book? Has our messaging been bad on this?
There hasn't been sufficient messaging for sure. And it's because with abortion, it's more obvious. It's ending a human life. Whereas with in vitro fertilization, it's creating a human life. Although, as I pointed out a moment ago, it also involves ending some lives. But the point is, because overall, it is oriented towards creating life, people think, well, isn't that a good thing? And this is where we need to teach critical thinking in our culture. We need to teach people to think deeply about an issue and not just on a surface level. On the surface level, the concept of creating life sounds great. It sounds positive. It sounds wonderful. But then when you dig a little deeper, we begin to see problems. And so what was happening in my talks on abortion is during Q&A, some people would say in questions, well, what about in vitro fertilization? And is IVF okay? And then what would happen in the course of my answering that question is some audience members would disclose they were conceived by in vitro fertilization, or they pursued in vitro fertilization. And so then I discovered this was deeply personal. As with the abortion issue, when emotions are involved, when personal experience is involved, it can cloud sometimes our ability to receive moral reasoning or logic because we want to hear a certain answer. We want to hear a certain line of messaging. We're personally affected and so forth. So I quickly began to realize that if I have this skill to teach people how to think deeply and argue pro-life apologetics on one issue, such as abortion, maybe I could take those skills and apply it to this other issue where there seemed to be a lot of confusion and less formation.
Again, our number 888-318-7884. We're talking in vitro fertilization with our guest Stephanie Gray Connors, the author of a new book called Conceived by Science, which is about infertility and in vitro fertilization. I guess the other side of this is the other emotional side of it is the not the parent who has conceived by or the child or the person who has been conceived by IVF, but the couple who is looking at possible infertility, and meaning that they really might not be able to conceive children together. So that IVF must start looking awfully attractive.
Absolutely. And this is where we have to tread carefully when discussing this issue, realizing real people's stories are in this debate. People who live with the suffering and the very heavy cross of not being able to have a child with one's beloved. And we need to acknowledge that that is a tragedy and that we ought to try to correct the problem in as many ethical ways as possible. So objecting to IVF does not mean objecting to interventions. As I briefly mentioned at the beginning, the fact that I pursued the hormone treatment of progesterone when I was pregnant is one example of an ethical intervention because my body was working incorrectly. It was not producing an adequate level of progesterone to sustain a pregnancy. Some women don't even produce enough progesterone to achieve a pregnancy. So they aren't getting pregnant cycle after cycle. And if they were connected to a good physician as I was and had their blood work checked, they might come to see, oh my goodness, I can't even get pregnant because I'm so low in progesterone. And then the ethical solution is to take a pharmaceutical that basically brings your body up to the level it naturally should be at. There's many other examples of ethical interventions we can discuss as the hour unfolds, but the point is we want to journey with people who are carrying this heavy cross and do our best to lighten it. And if that means solving the problem ethically, fantastic. And if that means coming up with other solutions such as spiritual parenthood, adoption, fostering, those are also other paths that we can help someone look at.
Again, Stephanie Gray Connors, our guest. We're talking about in vitro fertilization. If you'd like some help in that department, if you'd like some clarity, maybe there's someone in your life you'd like to speak to about this and you'd like some clarity for that, 888-318-7884. We have to take our first break, then we'll come right back, and I promise I will go right to the phones. About half the phones full right now, so lines are still open if you have questions about in vitro fertilization. 888-318-7884.
There's only one Catholic Answers Live.
The Aquinas Writing Advantage program is part of Homeschool Connections' set of online courses for your Catholic homeschool. Homeschool Connections' website is homeschoolconnections.com.
A lot of people that I think are holy, and then 5 years later you find out, oh,
yeah. Yes.
And then there are other people that, let's just say, maybe lack some social suavite, some sophistication, and you think, well, that was rude. And then you get to know them, and 5 years later you realize, beneath that rough exterior, there's a heart of gold.
Called to Communion with Dr. David Anders. Tonight, 11 Eastern, on EWTN Radio.
Welcome back. Catholic Answers Live. Hey, Joe Heschmeyer's very well-received book, The Early Church Was the Catholic Church, is on bulk sales now. And I think the reason it's available in bulk right now is they'd really love you to get it for your Bible study, for your parish, for your family, for Lent and Easter. So it's just $3 a copy. When you buy in bulk, that's $20 at a time, 20 books at a time. So for a box of books, it's $3 per copy, so $60 for the box. You want to get 10 boxes for the parish, that'll cost you just $600, and you get 200 books to give out at the parish. So consider that, and you can find the bulk sales over at shop.catholic.com. Shop.catholic.com. On the line with us, on the program with us this hour is Stephanie Gray Connors, who's got a brand new book out, a very helpful book on in vitro fertilization called Conceived by Science. You might know her from her, she's very well known for her earlier book, Love Unleashes Life, Abortion and the Art of Communicating Truth. You can find out all about her and schedule her for talks. If she's got time to get away from Violet Grace, she'll come give a talk where you are. Just find all you need about Stephanie Gray Connors at loveunleasheslife.com. I'm going to go to Sophie first. Sophie, thank you very much for the call. Sophie calling from Miami, Florida, watching on YouTube. Go ahead, Sophie, with your question for Stephanie Gray Connors.
Hi, it's nice to meet you. So my question is, if in vitro fertilization was the couple's only option to get pregnant naturally, like that was their only way that they could have a child, would that be immoral? Like, if you could take, I'm not really sure how the process works, but per se, let's say you take out maybe like 3 or 4 eggs, and then you use the sperm to create embryos with all those 4 eggs. Maybe you could use those 4 eggs to implant in the uterus later on for, each consecutive year when you want to have another child. So, I mean, would that be moral?
I appreciate the question, Sophie, because a lot of people who may have some concerns about IVF might narrow it down as you did and say, okay, what if it's a married couple and they just create a few embryos? Is that okay? And I would say, as much as their desire for children is good, unfortunately for them, the answer still is it's not moral to do. And the reason is human beings, by being subjects and not objects, should be received as gifts. And we aren't to be owned or possessed by another. So the gift of human life comes from God, not another human being. It's why, for example, we would say slavery is wrong, because slavery involves possessing or owning another. And we are to be an equal to our fellow human being, not have a relationship of superiority and inferiority. So the problem then with IVF is that instead of the gift of a human life, a child, coming through an act of sexual intimacy as the fruit of sexual intimacy, instead of that, with IVF, what happens is at the hands of a stranger, someone outside of the marital relationship, another human being is manufactured into existence. And it's as though the person creating that child in the lab owns it and is gifting it, but it's not their gift to give. Human beings are persons, not objects. And so what happens is then you're creating a human being outside of the bounds of sexual intimacy and outside of the union of a husband and wife who have made a covenant to each other in marriage. And instead you have a third party. They've essentially contracted out the creation of their offspring instead of receiving that offspring. And even if they only make a few, as you pointed out, they maybe go back each consecutive year for the other children. Let's say they make 4, they implant 2, they freeze 2, they go back over the next 2 to 4 years for the other 2. What if something happens? What if the woman needs a hysterectomy after the first pregnancy? And suddenly they have 2 children in the freezer that they cannot transplant into the mother's body because she has no uterus for them to go into. So that creates then a whole new ethical dilemma of they have children who are alive, but those children should only be in the body of their mother. They can't go in the body of their mother. What responsibility do we have for these children? Even if she didn't have a hysterectomy and tried for that third pregnancy after she has the first two babies, the other problem that could arise is when that child is thawed for implantation, the child not survive the thawing process. So we're jeopardizing the safety of that child by placing the child in a freezer and in a lab instead of keeping the child in the mother's body, where through sex, that's where fertilization will occur.
Sophie, does all that make sense to you?
Yeah, I thought that was a really good explanation. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for the call. Oh, go ahead. You had a follow-up?
Yeah. Oh, I was just going to say, so what other options could they explore?
I'm glad you asked that. So a few things. I think it's important for a couple to find the right physician, and looking up for doctors that are involved with what's called NAPRO technology, Creighton fertility, or restorative reproductive medicine. All of those categories are the same type of thing that involve trying to identify the underlying pathology that is preventing pregnancy and correct the problem at its root rather than pursue IVF. IVF doesn't correct a pathology, it just overlooks it entirely. So if each the woman and man go to a NAPRO technology restorative reproductive medicine physician, they could have a number of examinations done to determine what the cause of infertility is. The woman may have blocked fallopian tubes, and the response to that could be surgery to unblock her tubes so that sperm, eggs, and embryos can all travel through the tube easily. She might have PCOS and could have what a friend of mine had, which is called ovarian wedge resection surgery, where there was surgery done on my friend's ovaries that enabled then eggs to be subsequently, when they were ovulating, to actually be released so that sperm could get to them and be fertilized in her body as a result of sexual intimacy. Maybe the husband has low sperm count, and there's certain vitamins and pharmaceuticals he could take that would help with that. So the point is that they need to first be connected to a restorative reproductive medicine physician. I'll certainly give a shout out again for Dr. George Delgado, who personally helped me, but he's connected to a network of other doctors who do similar things. And so to pursue seeing if there's something wrong hormonally or that requires surgery. And for some people, once those are identified and corrected, they get pregnant. I give examples in my book like that. There are, however, some people who pursue everything that's ethical and still find out that they cannot conceive a child. And in my book, I talk about those people. I've interviewed friends of mine like that who've never conceived, and they talk about their pursuit of spiritual parenthood. A friend of mine travels the world in Christian ministry, and she finds fulfillment in that. I also share stories of friends of mine who pursued fostering and other friends who pursued adoption.
Sophie, thank you. Again, appreciate that call and that question. And Darren, for my book, I'm allowed to give it away to anybody I want for any reason, right? So, all right. So, Sophie, I wrote a book called A Teacher of Strange Things. It's about Jesus, and I would like to give it to you for free. Just hang on, because I'm apparently allowed to give away my book for any reason at all. And you have the same name as my middle daughter, so I'm going to give the book to you. The number here is 888-318-7884, 888-318-7884. Our guest is Stephanie Gray Connors. Her new book is called Conceived by Science. It's about in vitro fertilization. If you have questions about in vitro fertilization, you are welcome to call. Up next, we go to Karen in Boise, Idaho, listening on Salt and Light Radio. Karen, thank you for waiting. Please go ahead with your question for Stephanie.
Okay. First of all, Stephanie's been to Boise 2 or 3 times, so we've had the pleasure of meeting her, and thank you for all you do. How is surrogacy? I mean, I'm not for it. I just know someone who wants to do it. Is it related to IVF? Does the mother have to go through all those steps to be a surrogate mother as you do for an IVF?
Great question, Karen. Yes, I have fond memories of my time in Idaho, and it's great to hear from you. And it's a great question. And yes, I actually talk about surrogacy in my book in the context of in vitro fertilization, because the two can be connected. For some people, they need help achieving conception in a lab. That's why they go to IVF. Sperm and egg are put together, but ultimately the embryo is put in the biological mother's body. But for some couples, the issue is the woman herself does not have things working properly in her body to be able to have a pregnancy be sustained. And so such a couple might pursue surrogacy. And so the problem with that is severalfold. The first is, we're manufacturing a human being, as I already pointed out in my other answers. And there's this commodification of the human person. So the surrogate, for example, is going to be compensated for essentially renting out her body. There are some reproductive clinics that will pay $50,000, $60,000 to a surrogate to rent out her body. But then who is ultimately deciding about that pregnancy? Is it the surrogate or is it the parents? And I share some stories in my book about how biological parents wanted surrogates to have abortions because as the pregnancy progressed that they had wanted, they found out through pregnancy testing that genetic testing that there was something genetically wrong with the child, and they weren't counting on that, and they no longer wanted a child if the child was going to have genetic problems. So there are fertility clinics that will compensate a surrogate $10,000 if they go ahead and have an abortion. So we see there are problems with that. Another point to consider with the problems of surrogacy is while we can acknowledge the surrogate might have good intentions, they might think, gosh, I've been able to have a baby. I want to help someone else to have a baby. In fact, I watched a story about a surrogate in a documentary who said she's so grateful to be able to give the gift of a child to people who can't have one. And the question we have to ask ourselves is it the surrogate's gift to give? The reality is, as I mentioned a little earlier, God is the one who gives the gift of life. If I can give the gift of a human being to someone else, then I am, without realizing it perhaps, creating a standard where I am superior and the human being I'm gifting is inferior because I own and possess them and can give them away. But the problem is human beings aren't inferior to me. They're my equals. So I should treat them as equals, not as something that's inferior. An analogy could simply be, if you were in a toy store and you saw a kid really wanted a toy and his parents said, I'm sorry, we can't afford it. Imagine you responded by grabbing the toy the kid wants, and as the kid walks out the door saying, here you go, I'll give it to you. Well, the kid might be happy that he got the toy he wanted so badly, but you aren't the toy store owner, and in this scenario, you didn't buy the toy. So you've essentially given away a gift that isn't yours to give. And so the reality is we don't own or possess other human beings, and therefore we don't have a right to give a human being to someone else, which is essentially what surrogacy involves.
Okay, so you've answered my question, which I was pretty sure was the truth, that surrogacy is against Catholic teaching. So a hospital that claims to be Catholic but says they are open to surrogacy treatments, we have a problem, right?
Absolutely. If there's a Catholic hospital that is, I would say that there's two things. You could have a hospital involved in the implantation or the insertion of someone's embryo into a stranger's body, essentially the surrogate being a stranger. And if they're involved in doing that, and then the surrogate hoping by going to that hospital to have the insertion done that the embryo implants and grows for 9 months, that's a problem. Now, if a surrogate happens to show up at a Catholic hospital to give birth, that's not a problem. Anyone who is pregnant has a right to medical care when they are delivering a child, so they deliver a child safely, both for the woman and the child. But if what you're suggesting is a hospital not receiving anyone in labor, but a hospital actually impregnating a stranger with someone else's baby, which is what surrogacy essentially is.
Advertising it? A Catholic hospital?
Yeah, then that's a problem.
Well, it's a hospital that claims to be, yeah. So one other question. The girl, I know, the girl that is asking is not Catholic, and I was looking for a medical reason. She's not going to buy the Catholic reason, but I was looking for the medical reason that she's going to have to go through some fairly horrendous procedures to get this done. It's not just a matter of going in and having an implant and having a baby. Right?
Yes.
Isn't there some...
Great question to provide more info to. So as Cy has mentioned, my book, Conceived by Science, actually, although I'm Catholic, is written to a broad interdenominational Christian audience. So if this woman has even any religious affiliation, there are some arguments in there that would resonate even with a non-Catholic Christian person. There's also a whole section, part 2, is primarily not religious-minded at all in its arguments, and it talks about IVF and surrogacy being problematic because some humans are killed it involves parents denying their responsibility to children and the commodification of humans. And that chapter on the commodification of humans really looks at surrogacy as being part of that commodification mindset. So this is potentially then a resource that you could hand over to this woman that you're speaking with to consider some of the stories of people. One of the things I cite in here is some research, and I hear the music, so I think we'll let it go to break and I can wrap up the point after we get back.
Thanks, Karen. Thanks very much. Thanks to the other callers that are hanging on too. We will get to you as well when we come back. Stephanie Gray Connors, author of Conceived by Science, a wonderful new book for anybody, as Stephanie said, not just for Catholics, on the moral implications of in vitro fertilization. Right back after this.
This is Archbishop Salvatore Cordileone of San Francisco. Thank you for listening to Catholic Answers Live.
Did you know you can access Catholic Answers Live right from your phone or other mobile device? Download the Catholic Answers Live app today. The Catholic Answers Live app, available now on iOS and Android.
Have you enrolled in the Catholic Answers School of Apologetics? Let me ask you a more important question. Do you believe as a Catholic that you have an obligation to share the Catholic faith? In fact, the Church has answered this question, and the answer is that all confirmed Catholics are obliged to share the faith. It's actually in canon law. Catholic Answers is here to help you fulfill that obligation. Our School of Apologetics courses will equip you to help all the people you come in contact with understand what the Church teaches and why. A great place to start is with all the Catholics in your life. Learn the art of apologetics from the best of the best and start sharing the gospel today. Visit schoolofapologetics.com. That's schoolofapologetics.com.
Most of us Catholic parents agree our number one goal in life is to pass on the faith to our children. But here's the bad news. Today's world has a million ways to steal your kid's soul. Don't be afraid, says Father Sebastian Walsh. God loves your children even more than you do, and He desires their salvation more than anything. In his groundbreaking new book, Always a Catholic, Father Walsh shows you how to cooperate with God to bring about the fulfillment of His will for your kids. Always a Catholic reminds us that keeping our kids in the faith is about the way we live our Catholicism in our own lives and as a family from day to day. Order your copy of Always a Catholic by visiting shop.catholic.com today or ask for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
Matt Swaim here. Tomorrow on the Sunrise Morning Show, we'll discuss Fat Tuesday traditions and look at dust and ashes in the Bible with Steve Ray as we prepare to enter into Lent. Now back to Catholic Answers Live.
Welcome back. Catholic Answers Live. Probably the best music in Catholic radio. I think probably the best music in Catholic radio. I don't really think we have a serious competitor. I've listened to all the other Catholic radio shows. I think we have the best music. Karen in Boise was asking our guest, Stephanie Gray Connors, who has a brand new book called Conceived by Science about in vitro fertilization, about surrogacy. And you had left some points that you wanted to cover before we moved on. So you want to wrap up where you were?
Yeah, sure. She was wondering, is there risk to the surrogate? And yes, there's definitely things to be concerned about. In chapter 8 of my book on the commodification of humans, I go through that. So I would just point people and her in that direction. But one of the concerns is that if you're a surrogate, someone's been an egg donor, so you're not providing the eggs. That means the embryo that's in your body is truly a foreign embryo. The embryo was not created with your egg. Obviously, the female doesn't have sperm. And it's almost like, how when you have a organ donation, you have to take anti-rejection drugs. Your body is more likely to reject the organ because it's a foreign body. So there is concern that the truly foreign embryo in the body of a surrogate could create some problems, such as an increased risk of preeclampsia and other problems. You also have to kind of kickstart the body into a situation where it would be ready for implantation. And there's a number of things to be concerned about. So the book has more info, but yes, she's right to be concerned that there are things a surrogate needs to be aware of.
Thank you, Karen. We go now to Anonymous, listening to the Catholic Answers app. Anonymous, thanks for downloading the app onto your phone. Go ahead with your question for Stephanie Gray Connors.
Yeah. My question is, I guess twofold. So my sister has had in vitro fertilization. She has several eggs frozen. And then my niece and nephew came from IVF. And I love my niece and nephew, obviously, because, you know. But I don't know, as a Catholic, and they're not Catholic, I don't know how to, like, talk about that with her. And then she kind of had a flippant statement at one point, like, oh, well, I don't know if I'll have that many babies, the number of eggs that she has saved. And, like, so I had started to look into embryo adoption and, like, what the Catholic Church teaches about that and what kinds of things would go into that. And it looks like, I don't know, the Catholic Church is kind of up in the air about whether or not you'd be able to adopt embryos. And then even if they were okay with it, I don't know that my sister would be okay with somebody else raising her genetic child. So
you want to know,
to kind of hear what your thoughts were on embryo adoption, and then also how to talk to people about
IVF.
How do people in your family about
Yeah.
IVF and stuff?
Okay, Stephanie?
Yeah, really important questions. So one thing to clarify is a lot of people will use reference, as you have, to eggs being frozen. You could confirm with your sister, but in my understanding and research, the vast majority of things frozen actually aren't eggs, but embryos. And of course, there's an important distinction there because the embryo is a part of a human. The egg is a part of a human, but the embryo is a whole human. Fertilization has already happened. And so instead of parts being frozen in the case of an embryo, it's a whole individual, a child that is frozen. And so when people speak about their frozen eggs, we want to say, actually, is it eggs or is it embryos? And then if it's embryos, we want to be able to make that clarification so they realize they have children in freezers. What would we do if we froze 3 toddlers? Would we be concerned about that? Would we rightfully, be concerned about the protection and safety of those children and advise someone to not even do that to begin with? So that's the first thing. The second is, in terms of how to speak to someone on this, it's certainly a sensitive subject, as I said at the beginning of the program, so we need to tread the waters carefully. A few things is to ask a lot of questions, as I say, with all the controversial topics I talk about. If someone says they have embryos frozen, how many do you have frozen? Have you thought about going back and having them? And if they say, as you've indicated, your sister indicates, well, we might go back for 2, but there's 4, so we're going to leave 2. How do you feel about that? Have you thought about what that means for those 2 children? And you're asking these open-ended questions to see what they say. And even just having them doing more talking and explaining is going to get them thinking more deeply about something they perhaps haven't thought beyond the surface level of, beyond the emotion of the desire for a child. And so ask a lot of open-ended questions that would also then alert them to things they should be concerned about. Have you checked in with the fertility clinic as to what their measures are to make sure they don't wrongfully implant your children into someone else's body? Because there have been news stories about fertility clinics getting embryos mixed up and getting the wrong embryo implanted into a woman's body, and then a white couple has an Asian child and they're like, what's going on? And they do a genetic test and realize, whoa, this isn't our baby. How did this happen? So that's something that she might be concerned about. You could raise the issue with her. Certainly, if we're speaking to people who have yet to pursue IVF, making the points, as my book does, about the number of embryos typically created, that embryos are endangered in the process of being created outside the woman's body, that some embryos are killed, some embryos are scientifically experimented on, the commodification aspect of it. So making all of those points can help deter people. And then if someone has already pursued it, as your sister has, then I think really praying for a receptive heart to the open-ended questions you ask, so that she comes to the realization, which is likely to only happen over time, not in an instant, that they have made a grave mistake. And that's something that needs to be repented of. And we trust in God's mercy, but we need God, and we need to repent and confess to God, come to know God if they don't even have a relationship with God. And that's important not only for our own spiritual well-being, but so that we stop being a bad example. Because someone who's pursued IVF is likely open about that, which then could encourage other people to pursue IVF. So we want to have these conversations with people who don't share our view, so that they have a conviction, a change of heart, so that they start to tell people, this is what we did, and we didn't realize the long-term implications, the fallout that could happen, the commodification of the human person, and so forth. In terms of embryo adoption, I know we have other phone calls, so I'm briefly going to say that I do take an appendix in my book to tackle that. It's only tackling it briefly because it could be a whole other book in and of itself. And yes, ethicists are debating whether it's ethical or not. And some very renowned, wonderful Catholic ethicists have said, no, it's not ethical to adopt frozen embryos. It makes you like a surrogate. Other people have said, what, the embryo already exists, so we're just rescuing an embryo who's in need, just like I would adopt a born child. And there's nuance and complicated factors with each of these. So probably at this point, looking at the clock and knowing there's other calls, I would say in the book, there's a whole appendix on wading through what to do with embryo adoption.
Anonymous, thank you very much. I do hope that was helpful to you. We're talking with Stephanie Gray Connors. Stephanie from all of her pro-life work. They certainly know her in Boise, Idaho. She's the author of several important pro-life books: Love Unleashes Life, Abortion and the Art of Communicating Truth, Start With What, 10 Principles for Thinking About Assisted Suicide, and now Conceived by Science, Thinking Carefully and Compassionately About Infertility and IVF. And that is our topic for this hour, in vitro fertilization. If you have questions in that regard, 888-318-7884 is the number. And we're going to go to Rick now in Bloomington, Illinois, listening on EWTN Radio 92.5 FM. Rick, go ahead with your question for Stephanie.
Hey, thanks for taking my call. I really appreciate it. And first, I just want to say, so really grateful before God and man of your pro-life work. I really appreciate that. And usually, or sometimes right after the big compliment comes the big challenge. And, yeah.
Lay it on us.
Yeah, well, I'm going to have to take, conceived by science. I feel like God is so much bigger, and to imply that a human being could be conceived by science, to me, really, really misses the absolute mystery that conception is and the spiritual aspect of it, whether it happened in vitro or through sexual intimacy, as you've discussed. God is involved at that point of conception, both spiritually, physically, and I suppose metaphysically, if you will. But the ethical issues notwithstanding of terminating a I would say post-conceptual embryo, right? I mean, calling it an embryo is even kind of strange. I mean, terminating a human would be obviously unethical and immoral. But as far as thinking that man, it's a weird arrogance of man to think that we are creating people through science. God created the person. The other lady that called in talking about her niece and nephew, there's no implication there that they're anything other than a child of God, period,
Right.
Full stop.
Rick, I'm going to let Stephanie respond, and then I'm going to come back to you, because this sounds like something to have a conversation about. Stephanie?
Sure, Rick. I appreciate you making that point, and actually gives me an opportunity to provide a clarification that I certainly believe, regardless of how someone was conceived, that if someone comes into existence, that God is involved, because it's He who places His image in every human being and indwells a soul in every human being. What I'm proposing is that even if God can work with whatever choices we humans make, the question is not what can humans do, but what ought humans do? What should we do from a moral perspective? And so if we think, for example, not just about a child conceived through beautiful sexual intimacy versus a child conceived by IVF, but let's throw two other examples in the mix. Let's say we have a child conceived as a result of lustful hookup, and then a child conceived as a result of violent rape. Okay, in 4 cases, we have children who are unrepeatable, irreplaceable individuals who are willed by God. God has placed his image in those children and given them a soul. But I think you and I could agree that of those 4 conceptions, they're not all equal. As terrible as lust is, the violence of rape is even worse. But lust isn't good, and that's why we would say we ought to have children come into existence through marital unity and intimacy, not lustful hookups. And so if we can make a judgment call and a ranking about marital bliss, lustful hookup versus violent rape, why can't we also rank IVF into the mix and say, okay, even though God will indwell a soul, it doesn't mean that we should make humans this way, just like he'll indwell a soul in a child conceived in rape, but we shouldn't make humans that way. We shouldn't make humans through lust. But by the way, if we do that, God will still indwell a soul in that human. So what I'm trying to do is not question that God works with whatever messes or great things humans make, but that God has an order that he would like us to follow, and to ask the question, what is that order? What do you think of that, Rick?
Wow. I couldn't disagree more completely, honestly. We aren't making humans. God is making humans. And your distinction between the 4 different ways that humans come into the world is, wow, almost offensive. I mean, honestly, a child, a product of violent rape or lust, is somehow not equal to the other children is almost unbelievable. I mean, I would have to go back to from David and Bathsheba through that lustful, unbelievably immoral interaction. Came the lineage of Jesus Christ on his earthly genealogy.
I have to be honest with you, Rick.
It's that you would make that statement.
It's hard for me to quite grasp what the disagreement is, because it seemed like Stephanie said exactly what you're saying, which is the worth of the child is not at all impacted by how the child was made.
All 4. Yeah, I'm saying
I don't
all
see the
4
disagreement.
children are equal.
What I thought I heard
all 4
Stephanie
children
say
have
was
souls.
That people make other people. God makes the people. So if that child is here a product of a violent rape, lust, a perfect union which doesn't exist, or in vitro, God's hand is on all 4 of those, all 4 equal, and that person who is on the planet there's no distinction that I could make before God of any of those individuals.
Right, but I think that's what Stephanie said. I do have to throw in a good old-fashioned Catholic both and. God makes people and people make people. It's not an either or. It's a both and. There's never been a person made without other people cooperating, except for Adam, and even Adam, there was dirt around. But all I'm saying is it's a both and. There's never people are participants in the creating of people, but I don't think there's even a slight distance between what you and Stephanie are saying about the child. Like Stephanie,
right? Sure. In the example you give of David and Bathsheba, right? David lusted after Bathsheba, had a child with her. As you rightly acknowledge, God worked with that. God works with the fall of man by bringing Jesus into the world. So yes, God works with anything, but it doesn't mean what he works with was ultimately good. That's why David himself in the Psalms cried out, "Create in me a clean heart, O God." Why was he wanting a clean heart? Because his heart had been unclean, because he was a sinner and he needed God to transform him. So it doesn't mean that the child created doesn't bear the image of God. In other words, the child created, regardless of how they were created, does bear the image of God. But if David was crying out that he needed a heart to be created or to be made clean, he was admitting that there was a mistake in what he chose to do. And so the same is true then, whether we pursue IVF or we pursue other immoral ways of creating human beings. It's not the human being I'm calling into question. It's the method in which the human being was created. And I'm asking us to consider, do we need to be like David? And do we need to get on our knees and say, create in me a clean heart, O God, knowing that God will. He will take, as we're told in Ezekiel, the heart of stone and replace it with a heart of flesh. So God will transform anything. That's the good news. I'm glad you've made this call so I can make that point. But let's not confuse how someone was created with who is created. So I'm not questioning the value of who. I'm questioning the morality of how someone is coming into existence.
We got to take a break. Rick, thank you very much. I really appreciate the conversation. Stephanie Gray Connors is our guest. One of the great voices defending life in the world, has a brand new book on in vitro fertilization, an area that needs so much clarification. If you need some of that clarification, you're welcome to call, or if you'd like help explaining the moral position on in vitro fertilization to other people. Maybe you're a teacher, maybe you're a parent, maybe it's for a spouse. Conceived by Science is the book. The number here, 888-318-7884.
It's all about the truth. Catholic Answers Live.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Real Estate for Life. Real Estate for Life connects home buyers and sellers to real estate agents while supporting pro-life organizations. On the web at realestateforlife.org.
Wherever you are in the world, you can access the EWTN Global Catholic Network. It's everywhere. You can get EWTN's great Catholic programming on your car radio, at home on your TV, computer, or smart speaker. With EWTN's app, you can take EWTN everywhere on your phone or mobile device. If you want your news in print, turn to EWTN's paper of record, the National Catholic Register. EWTN, the Global Catholic Network.
Do you want to end abortion, halt the attack on traditional marriage, and ensure religious freedom for ourselves and for our grandchildren? To do this, we must convert the culture. St. Paul Street Evangelization is a grassroots initiative that recognizes this need and takes it to the streets. If you're interested in peacefully sharing the gospel in your area, visit streetevangelization.com to learn more.
Welcome back, Catholic Answers Live. We're talking about in vitro fertilization with our good friend Stephanie Gray Connors, who's back doing pro-life talks and media appearances after taking the time to have little Violet, bring little Violet into the world, parent little Violet, and now little Violet's with her dad while Stephanie's with us. And Stephanie has a brand new book called Conceived by Science, Thinking Carefully and Compassionately about Infertility and IVF. IVF, of course, being in vitro fertilization. And Stephanie, I guess this is a kind of a sensitive one because there's several people who asked us to ask you their questions, but they did not want to stay on the air to ask them. So I will ask Dale's question from Cleveland. It seems like you're splitting hairs between fertility clinics and IVF procedures. If God has determined that people can't get pregnant, how is it different?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
Well,
now, of course, you're not the questioner, but
my sense is that you were saying that there are many infertility treatments that are perfectly legitimate and fine and even and good, but IVF is not one of them. And I think that Dale is saying you're splitting hairs.
Okay. I think that I understand. So basically, if we're trying to determine what are the ethical paths to the great end of children, and what are the unethical paths to the great end of children? If we're concerned about the manufacturing of human beings, then a good standard to have is this. Is the path I'm taking aiding the sexual act in achieving its end of creating children, or is it replacing the sexual act? So if what I'm doing is replacing the sexual act, then I am forcing a human into existence at the hands of typically a party outside of marriage. If I'm aiding the sexual act, then I'm receiving a human who may be the fruit of a loving, physical manifestation of one's vows, but I'm not forcing someone into existence. So if you do surgery to unblock fallopian tubes, if you take drugs so that your body will release an egg, in each of these cases, if you take progesterone so that your body will be able to get pregnant or sustain a pregnancy, in each of these cases, you're still having sex. And what you're doing is identifying something's wrong with the body, and you're doing an intervention to restore the body to its healthy function, so that when the two people come together, their bodies are more likely to produce offspring. Whereas with IVF, you're not correcting an underlying condition. You are just creating a whole new procedure that replaces sex entirely. Sex is something God made necessary for offspring. IVF makes it entirely unnecessary. And instead, you're contracting out to a third party, someone who's not part of the marital covenant, to actually create a human being. And instead of the child coming into existence beneath the mother's heart, the child is coming into existence in a lab at the hands of a stranger who's very often determining the next generation by determining which sperm and which egg go together, for example.
Dale, thanks very much. Another one, this is from an anonymous questioner. It's a follow-up to something you were talking about earlier. Wants you to elaborate on this. What are the repercussions? As a matter of fact, everything I have is from people who didn't want to. So I'm not holding anybody off on the calls, by the way. These are all people that wanted me to read their question. What are the repercussions if someone decides to do an embryo adoption? Does it pose a moral problem? Are you willing to get into that a little more? Or?
Sure, I can a little bit. So the moral problem with even embryo adoption that would cause those who object to the embryo adoption to be concerned is to say, if sex is the way God designed children to come into existence, then the only time a child should ever get into, for example, my body, is through an act of sexual intimacy with my husband. And so if someone pursues embryo adoption, we're essentially putting into someone's body a child who would never be able to, morally speaking, get into that body through the marriage bed. Because if I adopt a stranger's baby, then that embryo would never have come into my body through sexual intimacy, because that's not the fruit of my marital relationship. That's not my biological offspring or that of my husband's. So the concern is that we're thwarting the natural designs of how things were meant to be by implanting someone who wouldn't, morally speaking, be able to come into existence through the marriage bed. One of the other concerns is that if a married couple pursues embryo adoption, that they are essentially closing the womb for the 9 months or more, if you count the time after to restore the body. They're closing the womb to their own offspring. So what responsibility do we have to, in a marital relationship, be open to our own children coming into existence through natural sexual relations? And how important is that? Because if you adopt an embryo, there's no way, if you have sex over those 9 months, that your own child will come into existence. And is there a very specific child God wills for a couple to have that could only happen if they had sex over those 9 months and the womb was empty so that their child could be conceived and implanted? But if you have a stranger's child in your body, then you can't have your own child for that period of time. Does that matter? That's an example of another concern. So these are just a couple of the concerns that we need to think about when considering the ethics of implanting someone else's child in one's body.
Okay. I think that the longer the discussion goes on about this in Catholic circles, the more I'm sensing a rejection of it. That there's more and more ethicists who seem to be going, the more we think about this, the problems are too great, and it's not likely acceptable. Although I'm not claiming that the church has said anything of the sort. I feel that trend. I don't know how you feel about it, Stephanie.
I do sense that trend as well, and I know for myself, again, because it's debatable, a couple years ago, I used to think maybe a case could be made. Now I think it's a very narrow window if it can be made at all, and I really hesitate. And that's why I really unpack that, though, with the appendix.
Yeah, and I just for the person who asked the question, I think the mainstream of although there are certainly significant exceptions to this, people who are very smart, much smarter than I am, if you kind of just look at the mainstream of Catholic thought on this, it seems to be going in the direction of, no, we can't actually justify this morally. Our guest is Stephanie Gray Connors. Please consider getting her book. Maybe leave it around. This is one of those ones where if someone picks it up, you'll have a wonderful conversation. It's called Conceived by Science. It's about dealing with IVF and infertility in a way that's morally responsible, but also sensitive to the real lives of real people. Stephanie Gray Connors, thanks. Really appreciate it.
You're welcome.
And thank your husband for taking care of Violet. And we'll see you next time, God willing, right here, Catholic Answers Live.